Hey there, art nerds! I'm back at you with another watercolor tutorial. Today I'm going to walk you through how I created this very Anne of Green Gables / Mori Key inspired illustration of Kara. This is also inspired by the composition on a Studio Ghibli water bottle that I have. So we're going to start out by stretching our watercolor paper. This is an illustration that I've already penciled using my blue line technique, so I'll be sure to link that tutorial down in the description for you guys. It is my magic trick. It makes creating art so much more accessible. So the first thing I do is I spritz the back of my watercolor paper with water, and then I use a hake brush to apply an even layer of water. Flip it over, spritz the front, and I'm going to use a hake brush to apply a layer of water to that as well. This first application helps activate my printer inks, loosens them up so I can lift most of them up using my paper towel. See, this is dissolving glue lines magic. This second application is actually intended to stretch the watercolor paper, so I spritz it with water again, and I use a hake brush to apply a clean layer of water. Then I remove the excess water with my paper towels, and when I'm painting, I like to use Viva paper towels because they are high quality. I can reuse them over and over again, and they don't leave textural marks or ink on my watercolor paper. I have no affiliation with Viva whatsoever, but I have been using them for a decade plus, and I find that they work really well. To help hold my watercolor paper in place, I am using 3M's low-tack blue painter's tape. I believe this is the 1.5-inch roll. I'll also buy the 2-inch rolls. You want the crepe paper finish, you don't want the foam finish. And I am applying water to it, and then I am removing the excess water, and what that does is it helps the tape adhere to the wet paper so much better. But I'm still going to use binder clips and Bulldog clips just to really make sure it's secure. Now, I have tried artist tapes. I haven't tried the Japanese watercolor tape. I would like to try that. I've tried artist tapes, I've tried washi tape, I've tried the removable brown paper watercolor tape, and honestly, the 3M blue painter's tape is the tape that really works best for me. So that's what I'm going with. So to start, I apply a little bit of French ultramarine to Kara's eyes, and I remove the rest of it using a paper towel. Then I go in and I paint in her teeth, and I paint in the bottoms of her eyes. So now I'm going to switch over to a smaller ceramic palette. This is actually a watercolor palette. The other one is just an inexpensive plate from Dollar Tree, but it works really well for watercolor. So I mean, you know, why change up a good thing? And at this point, I am starting her skin tone. I have kind of a color palette in mind, but I haven't quite settled with it. So I'm buying myself some time, adding some of the base colors, and then I'm going to make my color choices around that. So to mix up Kara's skin tone, I use yellow ochre with a little bit of scarlet. If you guys are not familiar with my work, if you're new here, hi, welcome. I've got loads of great watercolor tutorials to help you guys get painting. This lovely lady here is Kara, the 7-inch tall main character from my comic 7-inch Kara. It's a watercolor comic, and it is the driving force behind why I paint, and even the driving force behind why I share watercolor tutorials. I want to make watercolor as accessible as possible for as many people as possible. So I've got loads of helpful reviews and great tutorials here on the channel to help get you guys painting. So right now I'm kind of just blocking in some of the local color for Kara herself. So I'm using ultramarine, very watered down ultramarine, to paint the white on her dress, so the lace on her ruffs and kind of the bib of the dress. I also used really watered down, I want to say it's the old Quinn Gold from Daniel Smith. The old formulation is this really nice, warm, rich, transparent, almost like a yellow ochre. It's a great color. Too bad we can't get it anymore. Darn you, automotive industry. Because they're the ones who actually dictate what pigments are available. They're a bigger market than the art supply market. So if the automotive industry decides they don't want pigments for a paint anymore, everybody else doesn't get those pigments anymore. So now that I have some of the base colors established, I'm going in and I'm painting my triangle background. And I mentioned earlier that this was inspired by a Studio Ghibli water bottle that I have. I have the Kiki's Delivery Service water bottle with Gigi sitting in kind of a diamond pattern, and I just really liked it. I thought it was a very simple composition, but it was very classy, and I wanted to try it with my own character. So I'm going to be talking a lot in these tutorials about finding inspiration, repurposing what you see, and using the world around you to inspire the art that you make. I am a big proponent of getting out there and finding inspiration, whether it's while you're shopping or while you're outside doing yard work or just in your day-to-day life. There's inspiration all around you, and I really love just being inspired by whatever. I always have my phone on me with Discord open so I can take notes, like, oh, I really like blah blah blah, and then I'll take a picture and I'll send it to myself on Discord. And this is a great way, a disorganized way, but a great way to ensure that I always have my inspiration at my fingertips. It's on my phone, it's on my desktop. I can reference it whenever I need it. So I am working on, I want to say this is Saunders watercolor paper, but I am working on a cold pressed cotton rag watercolor paper. Cotton rag cold pressed paper is some of my favorite watercolor paper to paint illustrations on. When I'm painting comic pages, I like to use Canson Montval. It's a cellulose paper. It's a little bit more affordable. It runs through my printer like a beaut, and it takes details the way I want it to take details. But if I'm doing a standalone illustration, I love painting on cotton rag watercolor paper. If you're still painting primarily on cellulose and you haven't tried a cotton rag paper, oh, y'all, please write to Fluid, please write to Stonehenge and request a sample, because I promise you it's like night and day. So one of the things that I really love about cotton rag watercolor papers is their ability to take water, to take color, and how much blending and how much color you can develop. I find that on cotton rag papers, my colors are so much more vibrant and so much more saturated, and I can do more layers, I can do more glazing, I can do more effects. So I am a big fan of cotton rag papers, and I've got a lot of reviews here on the channel to help you guys find the right one for you, because every brand is a little bit different. Every brand has different formulations, different amount of sizings, different surface textures, and I hope that my reviews help you guys find the art supplies that you're gonna love. So for the diamond, I started out with a cooler yellow, a bismuth yellow, so a little bit of opacity there, and I basically filled the whole thing in, and then while that was still wet, I used a warmer yellow, maybe it's Sennelier yellow, that sounds about right, and I kind of dabbed it in at the corners, around the edges, and then underneath the flowers to create a sense of depth. So one of the reasons I got some of my colors established early on was it was going to allow me to decide how dark I wanted to go with the flowers, and those are coming up next. But while my diamond is drying, I'm going to add another layer to Kara's skin tone. So one of my watercolor tricks is I never finish out an entire area before moving on to the others. I kind of work on everything a little bit all at the same time, so everything kind of gets moved along together. This allows me to better gauge contrast, to better gauge colors. It's not always 100% successful. Really, if I were doing digital color comps, I would be more successful, but that's effort, and I only do that for stuff that's really, really important. So for me, doing it this way works pretty well. So that really vibrant golden yellow diamond in the background calls for some really vibrant blue flowers. It's really going to make those flowers pop. So I'm starting out with ultramarine, but I'm also mixing in a little bit of Soho's Urban Blue Violet, which is probably not available anymore, but Core makes a similar color. And this is like a really saturated, almost purple blue, and it works really well here. So I'm utilizing wet into wet, where I'm painting the base color, blending it out with water as it goes towards the center of the flower, and then dipping in a little bit of that darker blue towards the edges and allowing it to diffuse back into the flower itself. I'm doing this petal by petal, flower by flower, and I'm utilizing, as you can see, a few different brushes for this. So for this technique, I'm actually using 3 brushes. One has my base color, one has just clean water, and one has the darker blue color, and I'm switching them out. Now, anybody who knows me, anybody who's been to my studio, anybody who's traveled with me knows that I have so many watercolor brushes, because I will typically do a 3-brush technique like this at any given time. It allows me to work quickly, and I'm not constantly cleaning out my brush, adding in the color, trying to get the color just right, etc., etc., etc. It helps me move a lot faster. Now, having multiple watercolor brushes of the same size or similar size can get kind of pricey. So I'm a big fan of the silver black velvet watercolor brushes. These are a mix of natural, I believe it's squirrel and synthetic, and they are the best synthetic mix brushes I've ever tried. They are better than some full squirrel brushes I have. I think the only thing that beats them, in my opinion, is Kolinsky Sable brushes. And these can do some things that the Kolinsky Sable can't really do, and vice versa. So these are great. They're also not as expensive as, say, the Kolinsky Sable, which definitely can be quite expensive, but to be fair, they're also not as cheap as full synthetics. Now, I have friends who paint with full synthetics and they love them. I think it's kind of a matter of taste and how you paint. For me, I find that synthetics tend to drip paint. They tend not to hold the paint as well as a mixed brush or a full natural brush. And I find that I just can't get the nuance with a synthetic that I can get with a mixed brush or a full natural hair brush. That said, if I'm messing around with masking fluid, if I'm messing around with gouache, I'll usually use a synthetic because I want something that A, is really easy to clean, and synthetics are really easy to clean, and B, can actually stand up to those heavier bodied paints. So this is going to be a huge duh to anybody who paints regularly, but I want to disclose this because not everybody paints regularly. Not everybody has a boatload of painting experience. An illustration like this takes a while. It took me a couple of days, maybe 3 days to paint this, and I was pretty much just working on this and going about my day-to-day life. So you want to give your work time. When I share stuff on YouTube, unless it's a live stream, most of it is time-lapse because nobody wants to sit around and watch a 5-hour straight from life video. So I do time-lapse it quite a bit. I also always cut out the dry times. And as somebody who works and paints in Southeast Louisiana, even though I have a whole house dehumidifier and we run the air conditioning all the time, and I will turn the fans on to get the air moving, basically air circulation is your friend, dry times can be really significant when you're working in a humid environment like Louisiana or parts of South America. So I do want to disclose that because I do think many of the watercolor artists that we see online live in areas that are not quite as humid. And so the need to adjust the humidity is not quite as important as it is if you live in a really humid environment. So hey, you know what? I'm gonna talk about the humidity because hey, I think there's a lot of artists who would like to get into watercolor who have to battle with humidity. Of course, when I lived in Nashville, I had the opposite problem in the winter where the air would get so dry, I would have to boil water just to keep the humidity just right, because humidity is a really delicate thing when it comes to watercolor painting. Too much humidity, it never dries. Too little humidity, it dries too quick and you get all this streakiness. You can't do any wet into wet blending. So it's really important to find a paper that works for you, a painting style that works for you, and to get that humidity right. Speaking of, I am using a green gold, actually not speaking of at all, that was a terrible transition. I'm using green gold to start the leaves on these flowers, and I am working somewhat from reference. Usually I work really heavily from reference when I'm painting real flowers, when I'm painting real things. With this one, I couldn't remember exactly which little blue / little purple flower it is, so I'm combining a few for best effect. But I do have Google Images up and I am working from that. And I apologize for this shot because you guys cannot actually see really what I'm doing here, and I can't tell you what I'm doing here because I can't see it either. But it does look like I'm going in with probably alizarin crimson, and adding some alizarin crimson here and there to the stems and to the leaves. And that's something I kind of picked up from painting a lot of roses. If you look really carefully at many flowering plants, where they, like, the stems will have a bit of reddishness to them. So it's not just brown, it's reddishness and green. And I really like that. And that's something I want to bring into my flower art, because it's just kind of a nice detail, frankly. The red and the green together are a much more vibrant color than most browns that I might try to blend in here. So working wet into wet, I'm dabbing in a little bit. So I'm doing a layer of green gold first, and then I'm dabbing in some Daniel Smith Apatite green. So this is a much darker sort of olive green color. It's a really beautiful color. For those of you who don't know, I really like warm greens as well as phthalo-based greens. I guess I just like greens. But you can see up here, or just then, what I was doing a little bit more closely. And then using a smaller brush, I'm going to start filling in all the little twisting and twirly vines. My intention is not to fill them in entirely. I have a base color that I applied, and I still want that to shine through in some places. But I do think darkening them up so they aren't so lost against that yellow diamond is going to really be helpful. So to be honest, this whole time I've been kind of killing time, filling in the colors I know, while I'm still trying to decide what color I want to do for her dress. So for Kara, even though she has this really bright, vibrant personality, because she's a Lilliputian and because being able to hide is important, most of her clothes that I draw her in tend to be more muted, more subdued colors. I also take into consideration that even though they scavenge some of the fabric used to make their clothes, they may also wish to re-dye things using natural ingredients, stuff that's readily available. So for Kara, in general, I tend to stick to a more muted, more natural palette for the majority of the illustrations that I draw and paint her in. And this one isn't really much of an exception. I'm going with kind of a greenish gray. I think I used undersea green mixed with Payne's gray to get this color. But it was also kind of Anne of Green Gables inspired, and it was also Maury Key or Maury Girl of the Forest inspired. So that's what I mean by, like, I have a lot of inspirations. I try to bring a lot of different sources into my work and allow a lot of different sources to influence the kind of work and the kind of stories I tell. So to render her dress, I'm using a couple of different techniques. We have a wet over dry application, which gives us kind of the more striking contrast between the two layers. And then in some areas, I'm using some clean water to blend the color out so that we get a softer transition between the highlight and the shadow colors that I'm starting to apply. So after two base coats with our grayish green, I'm going to go in with some indigo and start adding in the shadows. And I'm going for a cool blue color because we've got so many warm colors going on. It just makes sense that for the shadow, we'd have something a little bit cooler and maybe a bit darker and more saturated. And I mix that in with the green gray that I had to begin with, and that kind of unifies the color. I could have glazed it on, but you know, frankly, I also would have had to clean out that particular well, so you know, why not? And once I've finished using my little multi-well palette, I just go ahead and move it out of the way, and that allows me to focus on my uber chic, uber exclusive Dollar Tree plate. So if you have not tried this trick yet, I don't know what I have to tell you to encourage you, but go on down to Dollar Tree or Daiso or any of those inexpensive shops. Go to the plate section and pick up just a plain white plate. It can be a small, actually really like this one. The square format works quite well. It can be round, it can be whatever size you like, but I use the heck out of this thing, and it's easier to clean than the plastic palettes that I used to use for years. It's super cheap, and it works well on my desk, and it works well for the task. So originally I started with French ultramarine for the band on her hat, and then I decided I didn't really like that. I meant it to be kind of an echo of the flowers, but it didn't really work. So then I added on some of that green, the indigo, Payne's gray, and undersea green for the ribbon, which is, you know, maybe not exciting. Maybe a yellow would have worked well there, but you're not going to paint a nice yellow on top. It's still going to be a green, frankly, if you paint a yellow on top of an ultramarine blue, and that would have probably looked great now that I'm thinking about it. But, you know, that's what's fun about doing the voice work for these videos in post, is that I end up kind of self-critiquing, and then I end up kind of learning stuff and making decisions on what I would want to do in my next illustration or how I would want to change it in the future. So generally when I'm painting Kara, I save her hair for basically the very end, and part of that is because I typically prefer to use more opaque colors. Like I use a lot of Indian red and Venetian red, and then I do layers of Van Dyke brown and sepia. And with watercolor, I found that unless you want the colors to move around a whole lot when you glaze on top of them, you really want to work fat over lean. You want to start with your thinner, less saturated mixes, and then work towards your more opaque colors, your more saturated colors, and your thicker mixes. And this is going to help prevent muddiness, it's going to help prevent color transfer, and it's going to help keep your colors from moving when you don't want them to move. So I'm starting here with a thinner mix of Venetian red, and I'm trying to leave some of the white as highlights, and this is a little bit of a finicky sort of thing. You want to use a smaller brush because it'll allow you to kind of get in there and do those finer strands and those finer highlights. I'm also dabbing in a little bit of indigo to start establishing some of that shadow. So once that first layer's had a chance to dry, I'm going to go in with a thicker mix. I'm also mixing in some Venetian red, and I'm kind of focusing on adding in the pupils of the eyes and starting in on the eyebrows and adding in a second layer on the hair. And with every subsequent layer of hair, and this is true for almost everything with me with watercolor, every new layer, I try to paint less, try to cover less than the layer before. So I'm trying to leave those lighter colors for highlights. I'm trying to leave those lighter colors for contrast, and this is really useful for building up contrast. So if you have an area that's really in shadow, like the part of Kara's hair that's kind of towards the back, you want to go really dark with that, because it's going to help create additional shadow. That's going to help give some contrast, and it's really going to help delineate the form. So everything's pretty much painted at this point. I'm just kind of going in and cleaning up some of the details using a smaller brush and lining some areas or adding in additional details here and there. Just basically kind of finessing it, cleaning it up a bit, neatening it up so that it looks like what I have in mind. And this is an area I really struggled with in the past. As somebody with ADHD, it being 99% or 90% done, my brain would often read that as, oh, good enough. And I often have to stop stop, take a break, maybe sleep on it overnight, come back to the next morning with fresh eyes to be able to go in and add that extra 10%. But for me, that really helps it look more finished. It makes it look more polished and makes it look more like what I had in mind to begin with. So one of the areas I find the hardest to paint is actually the eyes and the eyelashes, because if you mess up here, it's a big deal. It can really make or break the piece. It can make or break the expression. And it's something that always makes me kind of nervous, but it's really important because this is one of the final stages of the piece and it really helps tie everything together. So speaking of tying everything together, at the very end, I use white gouache to add in additional highlights. This is really helpful for adding highlights into the eyes and making them sparkle and seem like they're coming to life, adding highlights or rim lighting to the hair, adding rim lighting to some objects to help pull the contrast and make them stand out a little bit more. I think sometimes people think about using only shadows and darker lines for contrast, but you can use lighter lines and highlights to help pull things and to help define things better as well. And then once everything has finally had a chance to dry, it's time to remove our blue painter's tape. So I recommend you pull away at a 90-degree angle. This way, if it tears, it doesn't tear into your illustration, it just tears the paper that was underneath the tape, and you know, there is a likelihood that it can tear. This is the best tape that I've found for the kind of painting that I do. In general, I do tend to saturate the paper a whole lot, and I find that it removes the cleanest while holding my paper the most secure. But this is a your mileage may vary situation. You may prefer to staple your illustrations to your board. You may prefer to just use washi tape to hold it down. It's really up to you and what works for you. So that about wraps up this tutorial. I hope you guys found it helpful, useful, and informative. If you enjoy the work I do here on the channel, leave me a big ol' like. If you're new here, consider subscribing. And if you would like to help me help you watercolor or learn new art techniques, consider joining me over on Patreon at patreon.com/NatoSue.